Welcome to the Bioinformatics CRO podcast, where we explore the data-driven frontiers of biology and medicine. Today we're talking about space biomedicine, keeping humans healthy off-planet and bringing that knowledge back home. Our guest is Dr. Afshin Beheshti, a physicist turned systems biologist who has just launched the Center for Space Biomedicine at the University of Pittsburgh's McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So when someone asks, what is space biomedicine, what do you say?
It's basically the exploration of how to make humans safe to travel in space, but it has a lot of clinical applications too. So because a lot of people might say, why are you studying space? Because it only affects a tiny, tiny fraction of humans, right? So, but the reality is, as we probably discussed as we keep going, it has a lot of implications to everything that happens in space. So space biomedicine is to make humans travel in space, but it's also to make humans healthier on Earth.
So the Pitt Center for Space Biomedicine only launched last October. What gap did you see that wasn't being filled by NASA centers?
NASA centers, they're a government agency, right? So they have their own rules and bound by their own agendas, right? So it's good that you could collaborate with them, get grants by them, because NASA always gives funding, just like NIH does, to investigators like myself and other folks in the U.S. So that's a good role to have, and also they have their internal projects, so they have their own agendas, but they're bound by what is set for them, right? So in an academic setting, you're bound only by your imagination, right? So then that's the key there. So when you come to the, let's say, Center for Space Biomedicine here at Pittsburgh, my vision is that we don't have any limits. You could work with government agencies like NASA, get grants, so that's great. But then you could also work with commercial agencies. There's a lot of commercial space agencies, like not just SpaceX, but there's lots of folks like Axiom Space, Vast Space, there's Sierra Space. So you go down the list, there's a whole bunch of new players in the field, and then more will pop up, I'm sure, in the future. So then the goal is to get everyone excited about it and get lots of collaborative work going, not just in the U.S., but globally, to collaborate with people at Pitt, the University of Pittsburgh, Space Biomedicine Center. And then also this will help really accelerate the advance, because space is a big problem, right? One person can't do it on their own, and I don't think one agency can do it on their own. And you need all the space agencies out there, the government ones like NASA, European Space, but you also need all the commercial ones, and you also need all the individuals to work together. So there are some rules and regulations, because NASA is paid by the taxpayer. So of course they have to follow and be bound to using taxpayers' money correctly. When you're in an institution like here, University of Pittsburgh, academic institution, you have grants, which are great, but you could also have other options to play with to make the advances you need rather quickly or efficiently.
And what key research verticals are you prioritizing at the beginning?
I could be cheeky here and say all of them, but that's the big answer. No, but so for space biomedicine, the ultimate goal for anyone working in space biomedicine is to make it safe for humans to travel. So you want to develop countermeasures. So that's my ultimate goal. But to develop countermeasures, you have to understand the science behind it, right? So you have to know what's happening in space. To take a little back step, is space obviously is, we humans have not adapted to go to space. Our bodies have been evolutionary here on the Earth. The gravity we have, the lack of the space radiation is there, luckily for us. Otherwise, I don't think none of us will adapt very well. But in space, you got microgravity, very minimal gravity to none, and also the space radiation that's up there. So in space, you got the heavy ions, it's all in the background space. So you got protons, the majority of it, those smaller ions, which some of it's produced by the sun and solar flares. You get high acute doses, but also the background radiation from other activity in the cosmic radiation as these protons are produced. But then you get the heavier ions, anything, some helium, but anything from oxygen, silicon, to all the way to iron particles, huge ones, sometimes bigger particles. And typically from what those are, from like supernovas or black holes, they just emit a radiation, and then that's your background radiation. So that in itself causes a really harsh environment out there. And there you get this accelerated model for aging. You don't age faster, but all the conditions with diseases would come with it. You're aging faster that way. So it's an accelerated model for a lot of diseases too. So for space biomedicine itself, we want to cover all these health risks that are out there, which then will turn into the countermeasure development that I mentioned in the beginning. But to understand what the countermeasures are, what to target, you have to understand all these health risks. And this is where it comes to the fact that every health risk under the sun is, I'm not making space sound very sexy to travel, but I think eventually it will be, once we understand this, space will be really important and fun for the humanity to actually explore and make it go on to the next phase of what's happening in our next step, evolutionary for humans too. So yeah, so that's why we covered a lot of health risks out there, because there's things like cardiovascular risks, brain risks, central nervous, CNS risks, liver issues. Just go down the list. These are the different health risks we could talk about that are out there. But the ultimate goal then is to what's happening and then come up with the ultimate way to mitigate the damage caused. You might not be able to stop the damage caused, but then you could prevent it from progressing too. Then you can make it safer for humans to be up there. And then when that happens, let's say those disease models that are accelerated in space, those are actually, if you come up with a countermeasure to mitigate that damage, that could easily be translated down to Earth, the same, like, let's say, heart for heart disease or cancer risk. Those drugs cannot be novel new drugs that you could apply to help patients in Earth for all these other diseases that everyone has to deal with on Earth.
So, what does success look like in as little as 5 years? What would make you say the center's been wildly successful?
Yeah, so that's could be a tough question. Well, obviously, if we came up with the ultimate cocktail of countermeasures to make it safe for everyone to travel, so in 5 years everyone's out of business and we're all in space, that'd be great. But that's an ambitious goal in 5 years to do. But that's everyone's goal is that, and I think a lot of people's goals that in the field. But I think in 5 years, we could. My goal is as successful as for when let me take a step back. When a lot of people in the health sciences, there's a small fraction of folks already working on space biomedicine around the U.S. and around the world. There's a lot of people who are not aware of it, or again have questions like, how do I do applies to space research? So when I joined here in University of Pittsburgh and started the center, one of the things a lot of people were obviously curious and interested in, they're like, hey, I always wanted to work with space. How do I get involved? And I say this is colleagues I have in the pulmonary department here. I was like, well, everything you do is involved because of the health risks I just mentioned. So that was one of the goals, is create awareness. Then people start realizing that what they're doing can be applied to space, and then their knowledge can be circular. It goes to space, it comes back to the Earth, everything they do because of the accelerator model. And then now people are applying for grants. So there's NASA grant solicitation that no one was aware of. So then, I could apply for that. So that one metric of success will be that people start getting funding to do space research. So in 5 years, let's say, even if it's 5% or 10% increase of people getting funds to work in the space world, that's successful, because that didn't happen before I showed up, right? That's one success of that. Another success is to bring awareness to make Pittsburgh a central hub of people coming to say, oh, where do we go if we want to collaborate with folks on space biomedicine? Well, they come here, they work with us. And then those other people become also nodes. You have one node, and then you start planting nodes, and the network grows. Now, globally, you could create this whole central network of people working together in space biomedicine. And then the Pittsburgh in 5 years might be recognized as we are the hub of it, and we are creating this. So that's another goal of it. Ultimately, it'd be good. The funding is one metric that everyone goes by, right? So if a lot of funding comes in, then you can do a lot more research, whether it's from government like NASA funding or other government agencies, or commercial or philanthropy. All that stuff is probably important to come in and see how that happens. And the other metric of success is to start the volume of papers to come in and publishing in high impact journals, which is one thing, is another. In academics, obviously, papers are your mark on how well you're doing, right? And the higher impact journal you publish, and the more attention against, obviously, you've done work that's more impactful. So that's another goal too, that more and more people within the Pittsburgh community and the University of Pittsburgh are starting to publish nice, impactful papers on what they're doing and how it applies to space research. So 5 years is a lot, but if the minimal is like these things to happen, and then in the process, if, let's say, we come up with some really cool and novel countermeasures that maybe in 5 years says, oh, someone like me or the average person can go to space without having too many of the health effects, that'd be a huge success, obviously. But that might be 5-10 years, or it might be next year if we get lucky, but probably not.
So how are you thinking about the evolving funding landscape, given the coming budget cuts and so on? What do you think is a likely mix of funding resources for the center in the years ahead?
Yeah, that's obviously a concerning question in everyone's mind, right? Not just space world, but of course, NIH world and health world and the clinical world. Yeah, there's been, I don't think it's approved by the Congress yet, but maybe by the time this goes on, it will be. Yeah, it's been proposed that, so in NASA, as we talked earlier, a lot of the funds, a lot of the funds that come to support space biomedicine research in the U.S. come from NASA. It exists like NIH for a lot of the clinical side, which is great. But so, and NASA has the different centers and divisions money comes from. So like science mission director, that's a lot of basic research that is on animal research or using cells in a dish and things like that. So a lot of those research focuses on different types of topics that like plants and other things too. Now there's the human research program that, as it sounds, is concentrated on human and countermeasure development. And each of them have their agendas, but of course the overall goal for a lot of the NASA solicitations is to understand the basic science, but also in the meantime come up with that countermeasure. So it's been the budget proposal for the SMD, the Science Mission Director. I think previous year was like, I think about 38, 40 million for what was publicly released, but they're trying to cut that down to 4 million for the entire thing, including grants, people's salaries, overhead. So that's a concern. So I know, for example, I have some NASA grants in that division, and that's a concern. Like, what happens if they do that? Can they still fund what they said they're going to fund? Future grants, will they be future announcements solicited, which is the key. You need these solicitations to, what I said earlier, to come up with the countermeasures and help humanity. And the human research program, I don't know exactly the numbers that's been released, but I think it's like at least half their budget's going to be cut too. So then I'm not going to get the number there. But that's, again, a big concern, right? So that's that. If someone's reliant only on the funding, which is essential to do scientific research and help humanity, and most people don't understand, for like every taxpayer dollar spent on grants, usually it's been estimated there's a $2-3 return on society based on what it comes out of, not just job growth, because they say if I get funded, I can employ people to work for me, right? If I discover a drug, that drug's going to go to another higher thing, and I'm going to employ more people, and then it can save lives, and maybe also not only help space, but also, when I said coming out of the clinic, will lower health costs, because now people don't get those diseases to put a strain on the community. So those are the things that people might not be aware of, that these cuts are going to have a downstream trickle effect, not just in the NIH, but NASA world, same thing. So then we have to start thinking of alternatives. For example, I have some funding also from industry that helps develop countermeasures, just so more and more people might have to think about that, which is it's there. So industry, for example, has to think about how does space help them. And one of the things, like, for example, I have funds to look at this mitochondrial supplement. This one company's asked. I do a lot of mitochondrial research, and mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cells. Basically, all your energy produced by it. This is a very simplified view of it. There's a lot more, but it provides all energy. So you're in space. We're showing that mitochondria is heavily impacted in space. That means your energy production is lowered, and this is bad news, because downstream it causes a lot of downstream effects of immune system dysregulation and so on. So they've provided some funds. Say we have a mitochondrial supplement that could this work in space. So they provide funds for me that now I've shown potentially has a lot of promise to maybe be a part of a countermeasure cocktail to cover some of the damage done. So that's an example of industry coming, and how they benefit from it is now they see, oh, it works for this. Well, one, they can market it that way too. Also the applications, I said, clinically, I've already said to them, like, this supplement might also be potentially beneficial for long COVID patients, because what I see happen in space is very mirrors what happens with people who had COVID and they're now experiencing long COVID. So now we found potential therapeutic, which there's no therapeutic, there's no help for, unfortunately, the millions and millions of people suffering with long COVID. But that's a space application from a school funded research that not only will help mitigate space damage, but also now goes back to the clinic, that helps potentially help, because I have to do the test, and if they can potentially provide more funds, or someone else will, then we can do that. So, and then of course, philanthropy is always good, because there's a lot of rich people out there, right? If they're listening, but a lot of those rich people also can be interested in space research. And again, they might be interested in potential ways to provide funding for this. That's another resource. So those are the things that I think as a community, especially in this center, we have to start thinking of pivoting to, it's a balance of things. But the unfortunate side is, as you mentioned, the government funding, and it's going to be tough, at least in the next 3.5 years. Things might bounce back afterwards. Things change. So yeah, that's a concern for everyone, not just in the space world, but of course across the board for all.
Well, maybe following on that, get into
Yeah.
some of your research. Well, tell us about what you discovered about mitochondrial stress in astronaut samples.
So I guess a little mitochondrial 101, basics of mitochondria, because mitochondria could get very complex too. As I said, so mitochondrial is used to be long time ago. It's a bacteria. It's thought to be bacteria. So its own organelle, right? And a long time ago, evolutionary, then the cells, when cells started interacting with this bacteria, they realized, wait a second, these things are providing us a boosted energy, right? So why don't we incorporate this into our cells? And that's what happened in evolution. They said, oh, wow, this is great. This is actually going to be helping not just humans, but plants have it. Every animal or invertebrate or vertebrate has mitochondria, right? And it's for the energy production. So that's where bacteria don't have it, because mitochondria was a bacteria. So that's one of the reasons it doesn't have it. But that's the thing where evolutionary mitochondria got about to provide their energy. And then this downstream of that helps your immune system. That's why there's some antioxidants out there to reduce reactive oxygen species that causes mitochondrial deficiency. That's why there's a lot of antioxidants out there to lower that and then improve your mitochondrial and improve your energy production. Now, your two most bioenergetic organs in your body are your heart and your brain. So, for example, your brain's only 2% of your body mass, but 20% of the mitochondria is in your brain content. So that you could imagine if you get, let's say, damage done over time or in your brain, if something's targeting your mitochondria, that could be detrimental, because things like brain fog or changes in the brain for how you really just function that way, your mitochondria severely damaged can affect your whole body. Again, your heart's another bioenergetic organ, so that's the one. Mitochondrial damage there, that could be a concern. So that's a kind of a crash course. Of course, mitochondrial biology and metabolism downstairs has a lot more to it, but the simplistic put is, as you might hear, it's the powerhouse of your cell. That's a simplified version. So, yeah.
Can you tell us about work you've done with mitochondrial targeted
Yeah,
supplements?
yeah. So exactly that. So in space, what we see is that mitochondria, I'll give you a little crash course of the mitochondrial biology first. But in space, so what we see in mitochondria is actually heavily suppressed. So, if the radiation damage and that, so your energy production is heavily suppressed. And then that's across all tissues, from experiments we've done, from sending mice to space, cells, and also simulated experiments we can do on Earth from simulated radiation, space radiation, like microgravity kind of simulations. So we see that across the board. That's detrimental, right? So how do we stop this? So one of the mitochondrial supplements that's been funded by this company, Sucos, is a Japanese company. The nutraceutical side had this supplement called camphorol. So camphorol is a flavonoid. It's found naturally. You probably had some at lunch, breakfast, or when you're eating this, whenever someone's listening to dinner. So it's found in leafy greens like kale, spinach. Watercress actually has the highest content of camphorol. So out of all the plants that I know of, and some fruits have it, like blackberries, and I forget, there's a whole list of them that have it. And flavonoids are a bunch of different flavonoids. Camphorol is just one. And so we're testing this because camphorol is an antioxidant. It actually targets mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning it boosts that signal. So as I said, space actually lowers your mitochondrial energy and your mitochondrial copy numbers and your content. So you want to have something to boost your mitochondrial signal by creating more mitochondria there. And this is one of the things that it does. So this is one thing we're testing, and so far we're showing that, like, for example, we have one of my collaborators, Rob Schwartz at Weill Cornell Medicine. He can do these like organoids in a chip, meaning things that are derived from stem cells that someone had determined a long time ago. You put in factors, and then you could differentiate the cell into creating like a heart in a dish from cells, or creating your liver in a dish. So not real heart, real liver, but it's from a stem cell, and you could create that. So, for example, the heart organoids, they beat in the dish the same kind of beating your heart does. So it's cool. So, but for example, when we radiate this with the space radiation, what we see is that the heart is actually, beating is actually reduced significantly because of the damage done by the space radiation, which we know could be detrimental. But we give it camphorol, and remember I mentioned the heart has one of the most, in your brain is one of the most bioenergetic organs. So it makes sense why the reduction of the beat happens, because your mitochondria is being severely damaged. We give camphorol to that, and now it's back to the control level. So that was like, wow, this is great. Complete mitigated damage. We're working on the papers now. Probably in the next couple of months, we'll submit all these papers so the public can see it. And then go down the list. Like the liver is heavily impacted by, it starts, as I said, space and accelerated model of diseases. So in the liver, what we see seems like cirrhosis might be being advanced in space for the liver. and different factors like that. So metabolism, for example, liver there's a lot of drug metabolism, a lot of things in your body. Those activity gets lowered when you give it the space radiation. We give camphorol, and it starts coming back down up to depending on the radiation dose we gave it, similar to space, it starts coming back up to like the normal levels, control levels without radiation. So that's really promising. Now, there are some factors that it doesn't rescue, because I don't think this is one pill is going to not cure all damage done. So I think that we have to think about in mitochondrial, different organs can be targeting different types of mitochondrial factors and pathways. So this is the part now I think it's probably a mitochondrial cocktail that eventually will make it safe for people to travel. And so this is the part where this is promising. Now we have to go on the avenue and think about what other kind of mitochondrial nutritional supplements, or there's other type of flavonoids similar to this that target different types of mitochondrial biogenesis or metabolism. So what kind of cocktails to give? So this is where more fundings we need, more experiments to do. And then once we have the ultimate cocktail, this is like the magic pill in sci-fi movies. Oh, I just took this pill and I'm cured. I could just walk around and get exposed to all this radiation. But that could be a reality in 5-10 years. Maybe we'll do it. That'd be our measure of success. So that's the key. That's some of the exciting results that were, some of it's already available in the preprint that we're addressing some of the reviewers' comments in this one paper. But a lot of these results are going to be public or submitting for peer review papers and publications in a couple of months. And then that would be once it's gone through the peer review process, and then it'll hopefully be published by the end of the year or so.
Can you tell us more about the similarities and differences between long COVID and space flight mitochondrial damage?
Yeah, definitely. So this is like a really good example of like what I said earlier when people ask, like, why do you do space research? Why should we care? So, I always tell people it's always circular. What you do in space accelerates disease models, and then what you find there comes back to the clinic. Vice versa, what you find in the clinic can help space. So it's this nice circular loop that helps everyone. Just to back up this one anecdotal thing, like from the Apollo mission, everything, like in the morning when you get up, half the stuff you use is what's developed from the space research, space mission. Like your camera phones, the camera in there got miniaturized because they had to figure out in satellites how to get miniaturized cameras into all these components. So that's the technology involved. Like your glasses here, the scratch resistant that the glasses have was actually developed from the visors from its helmets to prevent space debris. So your glasses are going to maybe potentially, of course, those are a little thicker, but I wouldn't advise going into space with just your glasses. But so there's examples how technology has evolved that way. Now medicine's the same way. So this is the long COVID example, which is really great. So in SARS, what we have shown from our research is that SARS-CoV-2, the virus of COVID, that it actually targets the mitochondria. So what we, in the acute phase, meaning that you first get infected with the virus through this one microRNA, and microRNAs are these small RNA that target bind to thousands of genes that would inhibit genes. There's some good microRNAs and some bad ones. Sometimes what viruses do is hijack the machinery and incorporate the part of the microRNA that would bind to your genes. And in that case, then what it does is it uses that machinery to produce more of this microRNA to recreate the landscape, bind to all the genes it needs to bind for it to thrive. What it turns out, what we found, this is published data we have in the past few years, is that this microRNA is actually binding to all the mitochondrial genes that you need. So the virus then, if it does that, then it recreates the landscape and it inhibits all the energy production your cells need, which is the oxidative phosphorylation activity to create ATP, which is your energy production. And then the virus could thrive better. And this is why, let's say, when you get COVID, you get the brain fog, because the brain fog is related to mitochondrial dysfunction, or you get cardiovascular issues, or you feel tired, very tired, and you can't get out of bed, and you get exercise intolerance. Again, your energy production is really heavily damaged. Downstream of that, then it impacts your immune system and all the other things you see that happen when you people. So similar mitochondrial damage happens in space, same kind of activity. Now, people who don't get long COVID luckily bounce back. The mitochondrial, when we looked at the data, this is another paper we're working on, hopefully to be submitted for publication in the next month or two. But what we see is that people who recover from don't get long COVID, their mitochondrial is actually comes back to level. It gets boosted back to normal signals, even maybe it gets a little higher than normal because it's basically repairing all the mitochondrial damage done. Now, unfortunately, the people who have long COVID, they have their mitochondrial levels and the suppression that happened never recovers, even a year after from the data we have in this paper working on. And it's same in the brain from the animal models we looked at in the brain. indeed, like the certain regions that are involved with critical thinking, or how you could actually concentrate, with this related to your brain fog, that suppression, like in the cerebellum, for example, that suppression happened of the mitochondrial signal. Again, this is like the similar profile that you see in space. Downstream of that, you get increase of reactive oxygen species. You get more of a hypoxic or lack of oxygen in your cells produced by this, and then it causes cell death or dysfunctional immune system. So that parallel, although long COVID is caused by this virus doing it, space is caused by space radiation and microgravity. The outcome is the same. In space, that happens a little quicker than the long COVID patients would do. So that's the accelerated model of diseases. So this is where now this Camphorol potentially could be a therapeutic for long COVID patients now. But now we have to get the funds applied to that and test it out. I could be wrong, because that's well science. Yeah, science is you have a good hypothesis, you test it. If it works, that's wonderful. If it doesn't, you admit it, you're wrong, you move on to the next step. But that's what says this how discovery is made, right? Not every discovery is going to be, not every hypothesis you're going to be right. But that's part of science. And then when you learn it's not right, that helps the community too. So no one wastes money, wastes their effort, and repeats the same mistakes, or not mistakes, but the same wrong hypothesis.
Can you tell us about upcoming flight experiments you're involved with?
Yeah, sure. So these are potential flight experiments, I should say. We're applying for, there's the company Sierra Space, the Dream Chaser, and Dream Chaser is a kind of looks like the futuristic shuttle. It's one of those. It's going to basically not be a rocket that shoots up. It's going to be looks like and right now currently usually the payloads that go up is on a rocket. It goes up, right, and it comes back down as like a fireball, and then has a parachute, comes up and lands either in the desert or in the water. This one actually is like the old shuttles, but now more futuristic looking, and it's going to glide back into the atmosphere and land on the runway. So that's the Dream Chaser, which is being built by Sierra Space. It's supposed to launch. The first launch of it is in November or December sometime, or October, somewhere there. So we potentially have opportunity to apply for this, and if they select the opportunity, then we could put, it's an unmanned free flyer mission, so we could actually put some cells or some other types of experiments in there. So that's one of the missions coming up that potentially we have access to. As I said, these commercial entities, NASA has their potential opportunities to get things in space, but then all these commercial companies make it, space is actually becoming more and more accessible to everyone because of all these great things companies do. I have some potential NASA grants in the works, or not in the works, but in the review process, which has potential flight to happen if they select it. But again, the grant process goes over peer review. If we get a good score, hopefully there'll be funding and they select it, then I could launch that. So some of the experiments I would like to do with these future experiments is that one of them is looking at killifish in space. So it sounds odd, killifish. So this is with my collaborator Jason Prodesky at Portland State University. So killifish are, when they're hatched normal fish, they're just a normal fish, they're not extremophile. But when they're embryos, they become extremophile. And extremophiles are basically are a category of organisms that, as the name sounds, they're extremely resistant to a lot of different things, and in this case could be radiation, could be heat, could be whatever else, and they're creatures that have developed to live in some extreme environments, hence the name extremophiles. So these killifish, they're actually found in the Amazon riverbeds, African riverbeds, and 9 months out of the year approximately the riverbed dries out. So it's like a mud pie sitting in, and the rains come, the floods again. So the fish 3 months out of the year are hatched, they're floating around. So now they have to survive. So they lay their eggs, and now the eggs have to survive in that extreme environment without any water. There's all that heat and everything else. So they've developed this evolutionary to become an extremophile. So they have the 3 stages in their embryos called diapause stages. And their diapause 2 stages, their most resilient stage. And my collaborator who's done experiments on these embryos and these fish, like they saw, like, for example, gamma radiations, which is different from, as I mentioned, the space radiation. You could expose them to 50 gray of gamma radiation, which will kill us if we got exposed to that. So don't get exposed. Expose yourself to 50 gray of radiation. They actually are fine. The embryos are fine. They hatch fine. Oh, okay, great. No, 4% hydrogen peroxide, which would be really toxic to us and be damaging to us. They're fine. So and then you can go on the list. They have lots of really neat extremophile properties. So the idea is now, why we've done similar experiments already. We already launched them in space a few months ago, rather than new missions to do that, is re- capture why these things are so resilient, right? And so resistant. And can we adapt that into human cells and figure out the same mechanism? So we're not going to create a half fish, half human, although that might be cool. But the key would be to figure out the pathways, the mechanism. It's developing this extreme resistance and apply that to humans. So some evidence and some links we're already discovering. And Jason's the one who's really running this and we've done like some sequencing of eggs exposed to space radiation or been in space and some things we see that he mentioned is that in that diapause to extreme state of resistance, their metabolism mitochondrial basically shuts down to zero. Basically, it's an extreme hibernation state. And so why would that be important? So I mentioned that mitochondrial dysfunction happens, right? It's suppressed when you're in space. When that happens, you get reactive oxygen species. And a lot of reactive oxygen species in your cells are bad news because perpetuates more and more damage in your body. Would be like that's what would create this like lack of hypoxic or lack of oxygen in your cells and tissues, which would downstream ramp up your glycolysis activity and your metabolism gets screwed up and the immune. But if your metabolism is shut down to zero, mitochondria shut down to zero, it can't create reactive oxygen species. So then the cells basically is dormant sitting there. You radiate them with like the space radiation. Sure, you still get the damage done. The DNA, because when things get irradiated, your DNA gets damaged, right? But then in your body, you have a bunch of DNA repair protein activity that comes in to try to repair all that damage done. But when there's reactive oxygen species and things like mitochondrial dysfunction, there could be dysfunction in that repair to perpetuate damage and cause all the health risks. And this is the case here with the killifish. If that's shut down, maybe it has just your body, their system to repair the DNA is fine, goes on and functions fine, and it survives that damage done. So that's the part where I think that then you might think about using that kind of idea. Can we, let's say, that could be another type of countermeasure. Is it maybe a hibernation model or something like you see in the sci-fi movies? They go in the hibernation chamber, they sleep. And I have colleagues who are like researching hibernation as a thing for space. So could that be another physical type countermeasure you might do, or maybe adapt the cells to slow down the metabolism when you go to space, or do something. So there's been other types of research people have done to figure out how resilience can be adapted to human biology, right? So this is another example of it. So that's one example. We're trying to send these killifish in. Other than it sounds neat, we're sending killifish to space. But the other part is, you could figure out the resilience of why this is so resilient, adapt that to human. And then not only would that help it's in space, but it could also make us adapt to extreme environments on Earth since, unfortunately, things are getting warmer, right? Climate change is happening. So maybe this could be another way of figuring out how humans could adapt to changes that are happening on Earth if we see it.
That's pretty cool. So you co-authored a Nature Perspective, in which you called this the second space age. What distinguishes this from the first space age, the space age of Apollo and the ISS?
Yeah. No, good question. Yeah. So few things. So the first space age was really literally a two-state problem. It was the USSR and the United States. That was it. So the amount of things being launched in space was limited because the technology wasn't there. And then also limited resources because of just that. And of course, it's just the space war between two countries that happened. So the advancements made were based on, let's say, if this person did this, this country did this, we're going to do this in response. And then, of course, the U.S. did well. They went on the moon first, right? And then the shuttle program. The USSR did well, too. But their U.S., of course, as we know the history. But the second space age now, in that paper, you can see this little chart, and as you can imagine what happens, like there's been a kind of a steady line of things from the beginning, from the Apollo mission in the late 50s and go on. Apollo mission was 60s, but the first things launched to space in the late 50s until about 10 years ago. It's been a steady state of things being launched in space, a steady stream amount of things being launched in space, from satellites to manned missions and so on. But in the past 10 years, all of a sudden there's this huge explosion, like an exponential increase, even bigger exponential, where 1,000-fold increase of things being launched in space, because now not only it's not just two countries, it's lots of countries involved now, like all those European countries, the European Space Agency, for example. Every country in Europe has their own space agencies, Japanese space agencies, the Indian space agency, just go on a list, Australia. So I don't want to leave out anyone if they get mad at me, but every country has a space agency, whether some are more active than others, right? Some have more resources than others, but everyone's involved now because they see the benefits of how space can help humanity. So that's one thing. So then more things get launched in space because now more countries are launching things in space that way. addition to countries, governments, is now you got all these commercial companies, right? I mentioned earlier, this obviously everyone knows SpaceX. That's always in the news because they're launching things consistently. But there's all these other ones like Axiom Space, for example, is building the International Space Station has been up there for now 25 years, I think, is it around there? And they're going to decommission it. The government is going to decommission it by, I think it's estimated by 2030, something like that. But then that leaves room, maybe some commercial companies can use what's there. So Axiom Space is building a module for a new space station there, and then say the ICE is decommissioned by the government, they could maybe take some of that, or they could detach and be their own space station now. For Vast Space is another one that they're launching. They're going to launch the first commercial space station up. I think they're doing very well for themselves, and they're beating everyone. And they're going to have their own space station up now in the next year, supposedly 10 of what they've been planning. And you just go down to space labs. You just go down, there's like, I think there's at least 4 or 5 space companies planned to run space stations up in low Earth orbit. And then there's other plans for other countries to get together. There's Gateway was a kind of a joint ESA, NASA, and other JAXA and other government agencies to be a space station in deep space closer to the moon, as it sounds like. Now, I don't know if NASA's still going to be part of this, unfortunately, but ESA still will be probably going full force forward with all the European space agencies that are in JAXA and so on. And then the eventual goal is to have a moon base again. At 4, people are going to start thinking how to do research there. And of course, everyone says go to Mars. Right now, it's probably a one-way ticket. So maybe the people who are really advocates, send them there. It's okay. They could be our guinea pigs. A few people in mind, but that's okay. And eventually, then once it's safe, then everyone can do that long year trip back. But you have to do the baby steps. You have to figure out the countermeasures. So this is why it's the second space age, because you got not only just 2 countries, you got this huge explosion of things being launched in space currently, and then it's even more things planned to go. As I said, some agencies are planning to do a space hotels or space tourism. So that's, although I would say maybe if you're up in space for 3-4 days, that might be okay. You still, from some of our work we did in that, they said that nature package that we thought looked like 95% of signals were coming back to normal. But there's still 5% of signals that don't, which one of them was mitochondria. So still, even though 3 days in space, a lot of things come back to normal space, there's still 5%. Those 5% could be pretty detrimental for you if it's your mitochondria. So I don't know if I would recommend space tourism just yet, but by the time, let's say, these space hotels are made, maybe we'll have the cocktails to make it safe for, let's say, do I want to go to Hawaii or do I want to go to space? That might be the discussion you have with your family in 5 years. So that's why it's the second space age, because it's the explosion of everyone just launching things in space and wanting people to go.
Has anyone looked at frequent flyers? Obviously, they're getting as irradiated as you would in space, but do they accumulate mitochondrial deficits as well?
See, I haven't looked at that. That's a good question. I've been asked that before too. Oh yeah, the frequent flyers. Yeah, you're getting closer to, of course, the Earth's atmosphere. I travel a lot, so I'm probably a frequent flyer. And the thing is, though, the ozone layer protects you from the galactic cosmos rays. So it's a different kinds of radiation that you're impacted than from deep space. But nonetheless, you do get a higher dose of radiation than non-frequent flyers, right? Although, granted, it's very low. So, like, my dad was a commercial pilot, so he was a frequent flyer. So there are higher incidents of cancer risks in commercial pilots. Now, is it because of the radiation? I think there's colon cancer is one of them. But also one of the things is that the pilots are sitting on the radar, right, without shielding. So if people sit on radar, there's a cancer risk normally with that. But if over your entire career of being a pilot, you sit on it constantly, can that contribute to cancer risk? I don't know. Research has to be done for that. Maybe not. Again, and for the frequent flyers, I don't think they should panic that they're going to get an increase of cancer risk or health risk, because the research is either way at this point, because it doesn't. No one has done that research. So the short answer to your question is no. No one's really conclusively said, "Are you going to get increased health risk if you try it?" It's a good question to actually explore, because that could be another avenue of increased health risk due to maybe more exposure to radiation at that level. And then, then the next step is now you go to space and you get the bigger dose and more damaging radiation.
Can you walk us through your career? Tell us how did you end up here?
Yeah, so I don't have my career is not a straight path. So some people who go into science, they studied some factor in the graduate school and then did that for their postdoc, and then they keep going that career path, that trajectory. So mine's kind of been all over the place. I started one place and then randomly jumped to somewhere else. So I started in undergrad. I'm a physicist, so I got a bachelor's degree in high energy. I was looking at high energy physics. So high energy physics is basically when people go into high energy physics classes, smash particles together. And it's basically trying to figure out the basic question is figure out the fundamentals of life, universe, and everything. And I guess Douglas Adams would say it's 42, but I don't know if high energy physicists will agree with that. So then in the graduate school, I switched to, I'm going to put biophysics in quotes because I was trying to get closer to biology. I was still a physicist. So my PhD was looking at how DNA moves through objects I didn't even care about what the biology of DNA, but I wanted to know how they move. As a physicist, we model things. So I was modeling how DNA moves, stretches, gets through different networks, because this could answer different kind of questions about how your body can function or how drugs can behave, things like that. So I did that. And then at one point, when I was getting close to the end of my PhD, to figure out the next steps to do a postdoc, I said, well, I want to do more things that are clinically and human relevant. So this is getting there. So I only took one biology course the freshman biology course. That was it. But you get your PhD, it trains you to think. We all know how to read at that point, hopefully. Maybe some don't. But at that point, we know how to read and think. And the main thing in graduate school, I think I used to tell you first, is you learn your critical thinking. And half the things you learn in biology are wrong 10 years from now, too. It's not like physics. You get the fundamentals of gravity and the fundamental forces, right? In biology, and this is the nature of biology, it's so complex. We learn some things and then some new discovery comes along. Oh, that's the true mechanism behind it. So they're almost right, but now it's evolved to this part, right? So that's then when I switched to a microbiology lab. I moved to Boston and worked at a place called Forsyth Institute, which they concentrate on oral microbiology. Now, why the principal investigators, the people in the lab, hired me as a postdoc is because the techniques I had my graduate school about looking at how DNA moves and separates applied to what they want to do with the microbial work, oral microbial. And then after that postdoc, I did another postdoc where I joined a cancer systems biology lab. I'm actually the director. Her name is Lynn Halecki. She was a physicist by training too. So she understood, the physics mind. And then I joined the cancer systems biology, but systems biology at the time was a newer term. And what that means is biologists have been trying to solve things by their own, like cancer and things like that, for centuries, or not, well, decades, we'll say decades, right? Because biology has been around for centuries, but decades. So in that case, they haven't really solved the ideas that you haven't solved as much on your own. So, and the goal is really to solve complex diseases. You need a multidisciplinary team. You just don't need biologists. You need mathematicians, you need physicists, you need biologists, you need computer folks and computer scientists. And so you go down the list. And once you get all these different ways of thinking together, this is where you might come up with the new discoveries and use all the different tools from the different fields to actually really tackle like a complex thing like cancer, for example. So that's the systems biology. And it's a top-down approach, saying the biologists who look at mechanism, they start the nitty-gritty, like molecule, how that helps, which is important. But they also need the top-down approach. How do you connect all the different nitty-gritty details that are there? So that's where I joined a cancer systems biology lab. And we're looking at cancer. I was doing a lot of wet lab work and also computation work. Physicists can do both. And then she had a large NASA grant that I got. So that's how I got involved in the space field. She had NASA grants, started working on NASA work and cancer work. And eventually ended up at Tufts Medical Center where I was working on some more on cancer. But then one of my colleagues and friends joined NASA Ames Research Center in the Silicon Valley area, where they're starting to develop this tool called GeneLab, which is a platform available for free for everyone to use in the public in the world. And this is where all like the big data, the omics data, which is the bioinformatics sequencing data, ends up free and it's deposited to one resource that the whole world can use. So my colleague's name is Selon Koss, who's the project manager for this. Now it's called the NASA Open Science Data Repository. And that whole platform was there for the public to use, and now it's a great resource. So there I joined NASA Ames Research, eventually start helping with that because I had been a lot of space research now. And then eventually I got my own grants in the past 8 years at NASA Ames Research Center, working on topics like the mitochondrial research, or also other things like microRNAs, I said, or trying to figure out how to make it safe basically for humans travel. And then this is how I ended up at Pittsburgh. Was that about a year before I joined, I was at a meeting, there was some data being presented, and then meet some people here, and they started recruiting me here because they saw, what I'm doing can be applied to that. Just starting the Center for Space Biomedicine, but a lot of different things. Like I mentioned earlier, everything I do applies to many different fields. So cancer, COVID, trauma, things like that. So eventually that's how I ended up here and now doing the Center of Space Biomedicine, but also still working on all the different fields that are out there because a lot of things you do is plug and play.
So what do you think are the key skill sets that tomorrow's space biomedicine scientists will need?
I think it's multiple things. One is there's still a lot of unknowns in space, right? So that's what makes space biomedicine really fun because there's always novel things to discover so far. So one of the key things I always say in science in general, not just space, but space always works, is that don't lose your inner child. That's keep your inner child. So I think the more creative you are, which kids are very creative and imaginative, right? And so that's the key. I think in space more than other fields, maybe keeping that inner child and creativity is a key because you have to come up with a lot of out of the box thinking. Sometimes to design experiments. How do you do it in space? Because when you go on your bench here on Earth, you could pipette, you could do this, or you could set up a cell. Now we don't have any gravity. How do you do that same experiment? So that's the part. Creativity is key, not just designing experiments, but also coming up with novel questions to ask. The other part is having, I think in general in science, not just space, is you could be a wet lab bench scientist, but having the key computational skills is key because now there's a lot of computational algorithms, AI tools, ML tools, machine learning tools, bioinformatics, the whole sequencing data. This is all integrated now. A lot of times people just focus on be that and computational biologists, and then they collaborate with the wet lab ones. But understanding the language between the two is key because sometimes they might not the computational biologists might not fully understand the biology, and the wet lab biologists might not fully understand how the computation biology is done. So having the cross-lingual language for computation and wet lab is key for them to have. And I think that's a true success for the scientists to have. And in space biomedicine, of course, you have to understand radiation biology because that's one big thing that happens in space. Understanding how microgravity impacts and just really understanding the differences between space and Earth. But in general, I think any kind of disease focus you have can be applied to space, but understanding the fundamentals there for space is key. And also just having if you're open-minded and want to work on many different subjects, space might be the thing for you because all the different health risks that are out there is really key, and solving that is like putting the jigsaw together puzzle. Like systemically, why are these things dysfunctional? Maybe there's one key thing connecting things together, like mitochondria.
What do you think is the most underappreciated health risk for a Mars mission?
One that is right now is in the space biomedicine field. Most everyone knows what this is called SANS, space associated neuroocular syndrome. But in non-space people might not know this. They're not space biomedicine people. SANS is, as I said, space neuroocular syndrome, and it's the case where some astronauts, not all, but some, lose their vision, or not lose their vision, but they have vision decline. So no one, like in the ISS, the International Space Station, has lost their vision. But what happens is their vision slowly gets worse and worse, and they come back to Earth. Some of them who didn't wear glasses are now wearing glasses. Again, doesn't happen to everyone. So that's and what classically is thought of, maybe since of the gravity, you get the flattening of the edema, you get like pressure changes, fluid shifts that happen that can contribute to the vision loss. I think it's mitochondria because I'm a mitochondriac. That's what we call ourselves, and everything's mitochondria. So because in the mitochondrial field, there are diseases that due to mitochondrial mutations, patients would lose their vision, kids would lose. But we're showing that it could be a combination, mitochondria. So I think that's one. If you go into Mars and no one's been in that deep space condition outside that Earth's magnetic field that reduces the dose due to the physics, but going to Mars is about a year and a half round trip. So no one's really done that. So if you're doing that, what happens if your vision declines to a point when you want to be blind by the time you get there, or in the middle of it? That's bad news. So I think that might be one. I think also one of my colleagues, Keith Sewell's collaborates, he's at University College London. He's looking at kidney effects. He published a really good paper in that Nature package looking at comprehensively what happens to your kidney. And he's finding, yes, health risks related to kidney, the renal tubes in your kidney start collapsing, and other things. But more importantly, he thinks there's going to be a potential risk of kidney stones. So imagine if you're halfway to Mars and you get a kidney stone out in space. How do you resolve that problem? That's going to be a huge issue. And you do it on Earth, it's a problem, right? On Earth, when you get a kidney stone, that's a hard thing to deal with. But in space, how does that happen? We could keep going, but I think some of the more interesting things are that. I would say all of this is probably heavily related to mitochondria, so that would be maybe the central focus of a health risk, meaning mitochondrial diseases or like that. So maybe mitochondrial disease would be my number one pick for people to target because it could maybe impact a lot of these health risks I'm talking about and improve the condition.
Mitochondrial deficits are obviously a big area of overlap between what you've been discussing, the longevity space. What are other areas of overlap between space biomedicine and longevity research?
Yeah, there's a lot. So one, I don't research this, but I have colleagues and collaborators do. My collaborators Susan Bailey and Chris Mason, like they've looked at telomere length. So, the telomeres that kept the chromosome, and as you grow older, they get shorter and shorter, right? So then that means this decline of your aging that happens, and that contributes to health risk. So interestingly, in space, what happened is when this was first, they did this study of the twins. Scott Kelly, who went to space for a year, and his identical twin Mark Kelly was on Earth, and now Mark Kelly's a senator, of course. So the idea is comparing genetically identical twins, what might change, what not, what changed. But what they saw was that with Scott Kelly, your telomeres actually got longer. So people were like, "What? Did he get younger in space?" He came back. What happened was it got to the normal length, but then it got shorter than it should have been. So that means that maybe his aging got a little excited. But when he was in space, it got longer, and it's been told that also he lost weight and he got taller. So it was like, oh, great, a great diet plan. But fortunately, when he came back to space, the telomere thing that happened. And then luckily for science and the reproduction is the N of one. What they've done is they've looked at telomere links, how they are for other astronauts, like another cohorts, like other 10 and more astronauts. And they see the same pattern happen. So they have some ideas, maybe potentially this could be linked to potential other factors like these non-coding RNAs that we've involved that could be causing this, or other factors that, and it's not a sign that you're growing younger. It might be a sign that's causing damage to your chromosomes and your telomeres because of the environment you're in. And this could maybe contribute to potential, not as long, for longevity, it could maybe reduce it. So how do we stop that impact? For other longevity kind of type of work, I one other area of focus I work on is microRNAs. I mentioned earlier, microRNAs, the Nobel Prize was won on that last year. People who discovered it. And microRNAs are basically small RNA that was like 22 nucleotides. And before the people discovered won the Nobel Prize, people thought they were just debris because of the size. They thought, oh, it's RNA fragments. These are not important. So one person's garbage turned into this Nobel Prize, right? This huge thing. So this is a lesson for people in science and in general. Don't discard things that seem like garbage because they become very important, at least in the scientific thing world. But anyway, these microRNAs, as I said earlier, they could bind to genes because of this one region called the seeding region. And again, there's good microRNAs that bind to genes that would cause detrimental impact on your body and accelerate aging and health risks. But then there's microRNAs that diseases like cancer produce that would bind to like tumor suppressor genes, for example. Or in aging, there's a whole set of microRNAs related that are expressed as you get older and older that start binding to genes that would make you age faster, would decline the mitochondria, would decline your immune function. This is, people have studied this in aging, this shown only these microRNAs involved that. So my work, I've been identified a certain set of microRNAs that might be related with what happened in space. And then I said, what happens if I inhibit these microRNAs in like mouse models, or 3D organoid models, human tissues in the chip? And what happens if I bind a set of microRNAs with cardiovascular risk that with aging also occurs? And indeed, when you stop that, the set of microRNAs I identified that be involved increase the risk of cardiovascular risk in space, you stop those microRNAs and mitigated the damage done. So that could also then translate to longevity, because I think about all these microRNAs that if you inhibit, but the key with microRNAs are tricky because some of these microRNAs that are being increased due to the damage, there's a basal level in your body that microRNAs should exist. So if you inhibit them too much, now you're going to cause the side effects, detrimental effects that are going to not necessarily make you, for aging is involved, but it's going to, for your health, that's important. So this is where the tricky balance is. So this is where you have to figure out exactly what the important microRNAs are, where to inhibit it, how much to inhibit it, and then this could potentially be a way not only to prevent space damage done, but also reduce, it may maybe not make you age as fast, right? But there are people working on microRNAs as a clinical therapeutic on Earth. But the issue is there's been no FDA-approved inhibitor for a microRNA, because I think sometimes they're inhibiting the wrong microRNAs involved, or sometimes they're inhibiting the wrong group of microRNAs, or they're inhibiting it too much. So eventually, I think someone's going to come up with a good microRNA therapeutic, but that's not happened yet. But that's another example of space research and longevity.
To wrap us up, what in the space biomedicine field are you most excited about?
The chance that you and I get to go to space. My wife says I have to get good life insurance before I go to space. So, right, currently I agree with her. Right now, you probably should get good life insurance. But that's the key. Like, I think that just going to space right now, people think, oh, we're here on Earth. Why do it? Well, the reason we could do it is because it's not only the fact that humans want to do things that we can, and the fact of how do we push humans forward, but the advancements in science that we can make, all the great things that can be achieved that a space exploration can do. I think that's exciting, and the chances that it's getting cheaper and cheaper to do it, and maybe more safer and safer once we figure out the cocktail of pills you could take, or cocktail of ways you could, or hibernation to prevent that, then the unknown universes at our disposal, kind of like we see in Star Trek. I think that's what everyone works in space. Of course, we're all sci-fi fans, so I think that's the ultimate goal. I think the excitement of going past where we are at and expanding humans to new boundaries. That's, I think, really good. And then also the excitement of, if we are able to make it safer, we're able to maybe cure a lot of diseases on Earth too. I think that's the other part that's very exciting for me, because ultimately we got to help humanity, and I think this is a key for space.
That is a great optimistic way to end. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.